Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed, the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. Today I've got a discussion I've been looking forward to hosting for a while. It's been a long time coming, trying to get our schedules to line up. I've got David Pearce and Akhandadhi, and we're going to be talking about philosophy of mind. So I've been super busy with work and haven't had much time to prepare an opening, but David Pearce is a philosopher in the UK, does philosophy of mind, and perhaps you can take over. Just a quick introduction about yourself.
Oh, good heavens. Essentially, I'm a transhumanist. Back in 1998, I set up the World Transhumanist Association with Nick Bostrom. Transhumanists believe in creating a transhuman, post-human, super civilization of super intelligence, super longevity, and my particular focus, super happiness. But as well as transhumanism, I'm also interested in mind and consciousness and the hard problem. And it's striking that in the one sense, science is incredibly successful. Our whole technological civilization is based on the successes of science. Science works. So in one sense, yes, it's our dominant paradigm. And yet, and this sounds wildly hyperbolical, but I'm going to make the claim that science is inconsistent with the entirety of the empirical evidence. And by empirical, I just mean relating to consciousness, that if a scientific ontology, physicalist ontology is correct, i.e. if one makes the fairly modest assumption that quantum field theory describes fields of insentience, then essentially you, me, no one should be here. There shouldn't be any consciousness or experience, perceptual experience, introspection, anything. Why aren't we zombies? And somehow, I think we want to reconcile the successes, the technological successes of science with the existence of first-person experience. And my approach, which I'm very tentative about, I don't describe myself as a believer, is non-materialist physicalism. I'm a physicalist, a realist, but also, and this sounds like word salad, an idealist. As far as we can tell, the mathematical machinery of physics, essentially standard model quantum field theory and general relativity, exhaustively describes the world, i.e. the mathematical formalism of physics is correct, all the special sciences ultimately reduce to physics, and yet the intrinsic nature of the physical, the fire in the equations, to use materialist Stephen Hawking's metaphor, is a mystery. And quite naturally, one assumes that the intrinsic nature of the physical, the fire in the equations, is non-experiential. But my working hypothesis, which tallies with a lot of traditions, not least some of the traditions of the East, is that the intrinsic nature of the physical is experience. That yes, you and I, organic minds, are special, but what makes us special isn't consciousness per se. It's phenomenal binding into virtual worlds of experience, like the virtual world of experience you're undergoing now. And if one does assume that the intrinsic nature of a quantum field isn't radically different inside and outside your head, here we have potential solutions to, first, the hard problem of consciousness. Why does experience exist at all in a physical universe? Two, a solution to the problem of causal efficacy. How is it that subjective experience, consciousness, has the causal functional power to inspire discussions on its existence like now? Three, this intrinsic nature argument for non-materialist physicalism, it potentially explains the binding or combination problem. If one assumes that quantum mechanics is complete, then it is sufficiently temporally fine-grained resolution. You are not a pack of 86 billion odd discrete membrane-bound neurons, but instead a unitary subject. cat states, quantum superpositions in the brain are individual states, not classical aggregates. Now, there are powerful arguments against this conjecture, which we can explore later, but nonetheless, I would argue that non-materialist physicalism also solves the binding or combination problem. And, well, I say finally, but fourth, and this is where I'm going to be quiet for non-materialist physicalism also solves the so-called Paulette problem, the mystery of why it is, if the world's, one thinks of atoms and molecules as pretty basic, pretty simple and homogeneous. Non-materialist physicalism also explains the so-called Paulette problem. And if true, the solutions to the equations of quantum field theory encode the textures of qualia. Once again, this is a conjecture. I don't know if it's true or false. It's experimentally falsifiable. I won't be in the least surprised if it turns out I'm talking just as much nonsense about consciousness as most people. But yeah, there it goes. Non-materialist physicalism.
Cool. Thanks for that. So Akhandadhi is a philosopher also. He does more, comes from an Eastern perspective, represents some Vedanta views. He's been on the channel a few times, so we've gone in depth into some of the views he puts forward in his videos. You can watch on that. So Akhandadhi, do you want to reply to or ask some more questions about his view, perhaps?
Well, David, that was fantastic. That was a very good introduction. And you covered a huge amount of topics in regard to philosophy of mind within that very precise statement. So thank you for that. As Arjun said, I come from the Vedanta training of philosophy, which has a kind of a main focus on this issue of consciousness, and looks at our understanding of what exists from the viewpoint that it is the experiencer of what exists that we really should start with. The fact of my existence is the one thing I can be absolutely sure of. What is the nature of that existence? What does it mean? Well, it provides me the intuition that I am the I of my experiences, the subject, the witness of the thoughts of my mind, the actions of my body. I somehow or other have a relationship with the world around me, but that world is experienced by how my senses gather information, how the brain processes that, and more particularly how the mind then represents that world to me in the world of qualia. And I'm of course very interested in the qualia project that you are involved with. I think that is important in a number of ways, because qualia aren't just the qualities of sensory perception, the redness of red and et cetera, those type of sensory qualities, but also includes internal sensations. I think it includes emotions, felt experiences. I think even thoughts have a qualitative aspect to them. And I think we need to explore qualia in this very broad sense. I take it that what we are really dealing with when we analyze this whole process of experience and perception is that we have three baskets of functions. We have the physical functions. And as you say, we can analyze and model the reality of our experience of the world very successfully through mathematics, through science, and we can get a very good understanding of how everything works. And we can demonstrate the validity of that approach through all the applications that we're able to generate from that modeling. So we have the physics properties and functions. And yet we can go down to the quantum field kind of situation. It is the base that we understand at the moment. I'm not sure that it is the base. I think that we will be digging further in due course, and I think we will be surprised at what substrates may exist beyond quantum field theory, and how they influence quantum field activity. But that's obviously a conjecture at this point. So that's one basket. And then the properties that we experience of qualia, we know that we're having a very, very hard time reducing them to the properties we know in physics. So all we can do is say they appear to be a separate category of functions and properties. And so all these mental states, including their qualities of qualia, etc., really belong in that basket. But the Vedanta also sees that there is a third basket, and that is the experiencer. That consciousness isn't just experience, it is that which gives rise to the source of our ability to have that experience, i.e., which gives rise to the sense of the experiencer. Now, often the experiencer and experience are equated and really just kept as one thing, generally in Western philosophy of mind, and also even in some Eastern thoughts, that the idea is that you can't have an experience without an experiencer. But just because I'm an experiencer and know that I'm experiencing because I have an experience doesn't necessarily mean that the functions which give rise to my ability as an experiencer are the same functions and properties that are producing the content of my experience. So Vedanta would suggest that we have these three baskets of categories of functions and properties. Now, it is typical to kind of, in discussions of philosophy of mind, to jump immediately to ontology. And Arjun, you're responsible for that in the very beginning of your introduction. You wanted to talk the ontology of mind. I think we've got to be careful jumping to that because it often gets in the way of discussing that really the only way we know the world is in terms of what it's like and what it does. That's how science analyzes it. Well, that's how physics does it. We define entities according to the properties they have. And why do we give them those properties? Because we see the things that they do. So similarly, we've got to treat consciousness, qualia, mental states. We look at them in terms of what do they like, what do they do? And that gives us at least a kind of three-part framework in order to continue our exploration. How do they tie together? Well, I agree with David. Somehow or other, we know that consciousness interacts with mind. We know mind and the world have a relationship as well. So the interaction is there. It's not a question of denying that interaction. There was the point of idealism was mentioned. Often Vedanta is portrayed as a form of idealism, and that is particularly the Vedanta that is promoted by Shankaracharya, 8th century, and others in his wake. That it's a philosophy vivartavad, that basically this world doesn't exist. It's simply an illusion that we think we're experiencing. The Vedanta philosophy, which I follow, is a realist to some degree. It is not entirely an objective realist view, but it is an understanding that it takes a lot of reality in order to provide an illusion. And that there has to be something of the outside world that is giving rise to the commonality of qualia that I experience regularly, again and again, and a commonality that we're able to explore amongst each other as human beings. So the idea is that there is something out there. What it exactly is, we shouldn't be too quick to jump, because the only way that we know it and experience it is how it is presented to me within my mind. So that makes the external world, in one sense, it is objective, but of course it is subjectively appreciated or understood. So I think in quick summary, this is the kind of the Vedanta angle, that we have these three sets of functions, they interact, each of them has a reality and requires to be part of a picture and accounted for within a picture of reality if we are claiming that we have knowledge of what is in this world. One of the aspects that I think, David, I would love to hear more from you on is what I sense is your efforts to almost to give some kind of quantitative analysis to the world of qualia, because this seems quite a challenge, that if qualia are simply qualitative, then how does maths deal with them? How does science cope with the subjective? Really, it's not good enough for human society to simply say, well, science can't deal with it, therefore humans aren't going to deal with it. We've got to deal with it. It's absolutely crucial. So some form of integration of the processes of the subjective analysis that I suppose Eastern philosophies and practices have undergone in trying to really appreciate the depth and the nature of consciousness and how that interacts with the world, and the way that modern science is looking at it. If there's a way to bring these disciplines together to form a bigger picture, I think we'd be doing a great service for the world.
Cool. Thanks for that. David, do you want to? Should we probably find some points of agreement or disagreement? I don't know where you want to go first, David.
Well, first let's start with basic agreement that essentially consciousness is real and it is all one ever directly apprehends. That I am a realist about the mind-independent world and your existence, but it is a conjecture. My conjecture that I'm not a brain in a vat or a Boltzmann brain or anything like that. I find it quite compelling, the conjecture, but nonetheless, it's not as though I directly perceive the external world. And I just want to touch on a couple of points. How can science cope with this rich diversity of experience, the palette problem? And non-materialist physicalism, idealist physicalism simply transposes the entire mathematical apparatus of modern science, modern physics, onto an idealist ontology. Now, this isn't saying that experience is associated with all fundamental physical properties. It's saying that the intrinsic nature of the physical, the intrinsic nature of a quantum field is experiential. Nor is non-materialist physicalism proposing that the universe is conscious. There's a difference between the conjecture that the universe, the world's fundamental quantum fields are consciousness, and the conjecture that so-called cosmopsychism, the idea that reality, the universal wave function, is one big megamind. I don't think there's any evidence of that. Another point, well, in fact, my final point for now, I think it is worth discussing the nature of so-called perception. And there's one account of perception, I think it's wrong, but I'm now going to state it. It's that you and I perceive directly perceive our external surroundings, medium-sized material objects, and we apprehend their external features. Science is very good at describing the structural relational properties of the world, but the intrinsic nature of the stuff of the world, we don't grok. And the reason that I say that I think this perspective is misleading is that instead of a pre-theoretic notion of so-called perception, I think we need to adopt a so-called world simulation model of mind. One can see it prefigured in someone like Kant, the two worlds reading of Kant. Essentially, when one is dreaming, one's mind brain is running a world simulation. I.e., it's all within when you're asleep, let's assume you're having a lucid dream, you know the entire vast panorama is playing out in a transcendental skull, i.e. you're asleep. You can feel your empirical skull within the dream. But nonetheless, everything is taking place within the confines of a skull. And I would say right now that it's not as though when awake, one is somehow directly apprehending the mind-independent world. One's skull-bound mind brain is still running a vast world simulation. The big difference is that right now, our respective world simulations are being tightly selected by peripheral inputs from the environment. And on this view, the role of the external world is to select states of your mind-brain world simulation, not directly leaving its imprint upon them. I'm not. I don't even believe in perception as standardly conceived, even though I am a realist about the mind-independent world.
I think we actually, I think we do agree on that point, that the experience we're having of the world is not of it, but it is my dreamed or mind-generated representation of it. And the Vedanta sees that separation between me as the experiencer and the mind, and that the mind is acting as a sort of interface, gathering data from the world when the senses are active. When I'm so-called in the Jagrata awake stage, my senses appear to be active. My eyes are open, my ears are kind of attuned, my hands are ready to kind of feel things, smell, taste, whatever. But really what is happening, and it is described qualitatively in Vedanta, that it's almost like the mind goes out through these senses and gathers aspects of the qualities that are out there and brings them back into the mind to generate the picture. And in one sense, I agree with you. It's not that different to how the mind generates dreams from whatever is available to it at nighttime, when we're asleep, when the senses are shut off. Now, during the day, it's generating all these new type of so-called awake dreams that are infused with the little tidbits of qualities that it is drawn from the world in which we kind of are situated. So I think we agree on that. Another aspect that I liked when you mentioned again here and also earlier about the sense of almost living in a virtual reality. And in many ways, I find that a very helpful analogy for discussing the Vaishnava Vedanta perspective on experience. So that might be something that we could get into in a little bit.
Just a quick question: the Palette problem. How's that spelled?
The Palette problem. PALETTE. It's a piece of jargon. It's useful. The fact that if on a standard materialist construal one looks at the basic properties of atoms and molecules, they're extremely simple, homogeneous. What explains the extraordinary richness of experience? And as I said, it's only a conjecture, but we lack any kind of Rosetta Stone. But my working assumption is that the solutions to the equations yield the rich textures of experience. Clearly, there is an enormous, vast difference between the world outside organic biological minds and what's going on right now. But on this conjecture, what makes us special is the way experience is bound into unified subjects, which can in part, and I stress in part, be explained via natural selection. Because although one can speak of one's world simulation, it's not a veridical, it's not an accurate world simulation. For a start, the entire universe, the hub of reality, seems to be centered on me and follows me around. And this is exactly what one would expect of natural selection, which acts not on species, but at the level of individual organisms and genes. It is extremely adaptive for an organism to find itself at the center of reality. I assume you're at the center of your respective of world simulations. As Donald Hoffman puts it, fitness trumps truth. And I can, in virtue of understanding modern science, or at least partially understanding, the view from nowhere, God's eye view, I can recognize intellectually that this is delusive. I'm not really the center of reality, but nonetheless, empirically, this is what seems to be the case.
Well, yep. I certainly believe I'm the center of my little universe. I try to convince myself that there are others also out there that are deserving of my attention, care, and empathy. Yes, now I probably just with the evocation of natural kind of selection and kind of evolutionary kind of purposes, I kind of tend to feel a little ambivalent towards those sort of theories, because all they're saying is that consciousness is useful. Consciousness is useful, and my consciousness within this body, has its perspective. And I think there are certainly other models that would happily account for exactly the same observations on that one.
I think it's worth stressing that the theory of evolution via natural selection and its the modern synthesis and so on, it's in one sense substrate neutral. It applies whether information bearing self-replicators are experiential or material. In one sense, I consider, I believe in evolution via natural selection. I think it's extraordinarily powerful. It's explanatory power. In another sense, it doesn't really explain anything, because it'd be possible with a bit of ingenuity for our successors to create a molecular duplicate of you, just assembled from scratch. And that molecular duplicate would presumably have exactly the same experiences, qualia, the same world simulation as you do. So, in terms of...
becomes that I would probably disagree with, that we cannot make that particular assumption. All we can know is that a molecular version of myself would be the machinery of my biology and hopefully a good representation of my brain. But that doesn't mean that it would actually function to generate consciousness or even the qualities of that they're in the mind. And that's why we kind of need to understand that we've got the functions of physics, we've got the functions of mind and the functions of consciousness. So if you're going to do a copy of me, you're going to need to make sure that you have designed in all three functions, practically speaking, and you will need to have attention to each of those rather than think, well, I've done the physics, therefore the other ones are automatically going to be there. I think that is the presumption that possibly is not helpful to us.
That's interesting. Often, yes, trying to disinter respective background assumptions is really valuable. Yes, this question: if a molecular duplicate of you is assembled, will that entity be type identical in its conscious experiences and its world simulation? And I think most scientists would say yes. But it's interesting that you are raising doubt about this. I mean, there is a mystery. There is a profound mystery as to why, as I said, this molecular duplicate is conscious at all. The hard problem. There's a profound mystery why a pack of 86 billion supposedly decohered classical or quasi-classical neurons is a subject of experience. Yeah, the four challenges I mentioned in my opening remarks, but nonetheless, assuming the uniformity of nature, most orthodox scientists would, pretty much take it for granted that your molecular duplicate was type identical to in its experiences. And it's interesting that you are raising doubts about this.
I just raise it because in one sense it's a circular argument. We don't know how the body-brain complex produces consciousness, but we just assume that if we're going to recreate the body-brain complex, we'll have consciousness. So my feeling is that we need to understand what are the functions that are likely to be missing because they haven't been engineered into the system. And we don't, we need to know how are they engineered to exist in the first place.
I think this question...
Therefore, I'm not, for instance, I'm not a believer that we're going to upload our consciousness digitally.
We agree.
Okay.
This question...
Well, tell me your thoughts on that. Why do you see that there's maybe limitations on that one?
I believe that classical Turing machines and classical connectionist systems, massively parallel connectionist systems, do not have the right architecture to support phenomenally bound subjects of experience. They have the wrong architecture to support phenomenal binding minds. I'm not a substrate chauvinist, a carbon chauvinist, i.e. Though a classical Turing machine, you would expect it to be implemented in silicon. It could be implemented using carbon atoms. It still wouldn't be a unified subject of experience. Now one can have a debate about what are the upper bounds to zombie intelligence. But yes, as I said, I would argue that what makes organic minds over the past 500 million years or so special, the evolution, the functional advantage of consciousness is binding. And the way to appreciate just how computationally, functionally powerful binding is to look at rare neurological syndromes where binding breaks down. And someone with integrative agnosia, for example, can see a tooth, a mane, jaws, but can't see a lion. Someone with simultaneous agnosia can only see one object at once. Someone with cerebral achinotopsia or motion blindness can't see motion. Someone with this syndrome can see the pride of hungry lions in the distance, then a bit nearer, then a bit nearer still, but can't perceive motion. Or just someone with florid schizophrenia and hasn't got anything approximating a unitary self. Syndromes like this show that consciousness has an extremely powerful computational role in organic minds, but rather than being consciousness subjectivity per se that being adaptive, it is phenomenally bound consciousness, bound into subjects of experience, virtual worlds. And what classical digital computers and classically parallel connectionist systems can't do on pain of magic or so-called strong emergence is support phenomenal binding. That's quite a controversial view, but that's my tentative view at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, those examples you gave of different, I suppose, disorders of perception are of perception, and each one of them, has its disadvantages for the individual. But in one sense, you could compare those with kind of disorders of the sensors that I might be using in some machine. It's not picking up the motion as smoothly as it's meant to. It's only picking up punctuated information about an object appearing for it. So if I had that type of sensor on, say, an autonomous vehicle, that would be a problem. So these are disorders of functionality and perception, but they're not necessarily linked absolutely to the importance of consciousness, because on an autonomous vehicle, I need sensors that work smoothly and well, but they don't have to have any qualitative experience or phenomenal experience of that world. It's simply just a stimulus response system. So I think the qualities and the benefits of consciousness are of the fact of actual existence. And the Vedanta approaches this in a way that it is suggesting actually existence of consciousness is the primary thing. And really the need for embodiment and the need for interaction is a way of providing particular types of experiences for consciousness. So it's really starting from the point that, if you like, the world hasn't produced consciousness as something that is useful and beneficial for its biological units, but rather that the consciousness is generating a world that is beneficial to consciousness in its interactions. And that's why it's a bit like that, the example of the virtual reality, that I'm not a gamer, but I certainly know many of the younger generation around me who are. So I am not kind of immune to all of this. But it does appear that for my enjoyment, I'm willing to open my computer, start this program, and enter this world of experience, by taking on the avatar, investing my aspirations and my enjoyment in that avatar as it undergoes its exploits in that virtual world. And that is the perspective. It's coming at the whole of our existence and reality from that differing kind of starting point, which is interesting. And I'm not saying that, we have to say that's the only valid approach, but it's just interesting to change how we look at this world and take it from a completely different standpoint.
Yes, just to follow on from this, are there two immensely challenging problems or only one? On a standard view, there is the mystery of why anything exists at all. Why does the physical universe exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? And we can touch on this if anyone is interested. And secondly, there is the hard problem of consciousness. How is it that physical matter and energy, the physical universe, generates subjective experience? Two separate mysteries. My working assumption is that there is only one fundamental mystery. Why is there something rather than nothing? It's not a case that the physical world somehow creates consciousness, but consciousness is the essence of the physical. And if this view, non-materialist physicalism, the term isn't mine, it's actually due to late philosopher Grover Maxwell. It's sometimes called constitutive panpsychism, though I think panpsychism is a misleading term. It suggests some kind of property dualism. But if non-materialist physicalism is true, yes, it's the very essence of a quantum field, what you're actually undergoing right now. So yeah, are there two mysteries or one?
I probably see one, though the Vedanta picture tries to deal with the why is there something rather than nothing. Ultimately, it says, well, there is something. That's the point we've got to work with. There is something, and the question is, from where does it all come? What is the ultimate source of everything that exists? That becomes the question that we can try and explore. Now, the Vedanta looks at it like this, that we have to get to the point of what is the source from which everything that changes comes, happens. We've got to get beyond everything that changes to that which is a kind of permanent substrate, a permanent source, but which can be defined in such a way that it is responsible for all the properties and products of the diversity of reality that as we explore. So Vedanta looks at it, and I think that we are probably have similar concepts. It's just that I think Vedanta says we're going to have to dig deeper than the quantum world. There's going to be, at a certain level, there's going to be a substrate that will unify the world of physics and the world of mind. And if we dig deeper, there's going to be a substrate which unifies both that world of physics and mind with the world of consciousness, and from which we will be able to understand how each of these diverse properties and functions emerges from that single source. So that's the way kind of Vedanta is asking us to carry out our exploration. It focuses on the exploration of consciousness, because that is the thing closest known to us and which is something that can be worked on. And since consciousness is relational, it may be able to access aspects of reality and even of the source of reality in ways that are direct and perceptional.
Clearly, we give differing weights to the authority of the Vedantas. I mean, possibly, in one sense, I'm a prisoner of my conceptual scheme. There's this tremendous reverence, almost veneration for science, and it's only with extreme difficulty I tear myself away from the standard materialist paradigm and argue for non-materialist physicalism. And if one does take science, physicalism seriously, physicalism, this idea that no element of reality is missing from the formalism of physics or tomorrow's physics, a lot of discussions of consciousness and mind are incredibly vague or waffly, but it's worth stressing that if non-materialist physicalism is true, this is a mathematically rigorous theory. You've probably seen this Lagrangian, or the standard model. It's incredibly precise and exact. There is nothing waffly about the mathematical apparatus, the mathematical straitjacket of physics. What one is saying that is radically at variance with orthodoxy is the idea that the mathematical formalism describes patterns of sentience. That's the one point I wanted to make. The second was back to this mystery of why is there something rather than nothing? And in one sense, it's a bit different from what we've been chatting about before. I explore a particular explanation space. I don't think anyone knows why there is something rather than nothing. Obviously, people have thought about this question for millennia. It seems to be unanswerable. One can invoke God or a simulator or something like that, but that just pushes the question back. I explore the explanation space of a so-called zero ontology. The term is due to philosopher Arthur Wetherell. I mean, why is it that something analogous to our pre-existing conception of nothing or nothingness exists? And I need to explain this. According to physics, the mass energy of the universe is exactly cancelled out by negative gravitational energy. The positive and electric charge cancel each other out. In modern physics, information plays a fundamental role. Information is always conserved unless one believes in the so-called collapse of the wave function. And if so-called wave function monism is true, if reality is to be described by a single wave function, this is no collapse quantum mechanics, there is a sense in which the actual information content of reality is zero. And I recall as a teenager, I used to brood about what would a complete absence of properties entail. And I couldn't make much sense of the idea. But I stumbled across something that was news to me. It wasn't news to information scientists, that zero information is equivalent to all possible descriptions. And this is Everettian no collapse quantum mechanics. And
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No. As I said, I'm not pretending that this is an explanation. What I'm suggesting that this is an explanation space as to where we should be looking for answers. That it's a tantalizing clue. It's obviously absurd to say that nothing exists. Clearly, a lot of things exist. But why should something analogous to nothing be the case? And I find this an important clue. It may be a misleading clue. One nice thing is that the conjecture is falsifiable if the wave function ever collapses, if it can be shown that non-zero information exists, if black holes destroy information or anything like that, then a zero ontology is refuted. But as I said, what is the information content of reality? Is it infinite information? Is it information limited by the so-called Bekenstein bound? We won't go into that now unless anyone is particularly interesting. Is it the case that, to quote the title of a paper by Max Tegmark, does the universe contain almost no information? Is it just a very simple little algorithm generates it? Or, and this is my working assumption, is the actual information content of reality strictly zero?
And this is very interesting. You made a statement quoting someone a statement you found challenging, that you have a state of zero information, but which contains all possibilities. Is that how?
Yes, it's not. Yeah, it's not I just recall in some pop pop science text I read as a teenager, and just it leapt at me. Yes, this is Everettian quantum mechanics, and this is an answer to the mystery of why there is something rather than nothing. I mean, it said an information scientist wouldn't particularly dispute this view. Think of the Library of Babel. Intuitively, the Library of Babel has a vast amount of information. Actually, Library of Babel, all possible books, all possible collection of letters. Yes, it contains this podcast, everything that's ever been written, complete jumble of stuff. Actually, the Library of Babel has no information. Or, to be slightly more accurate, the classical Library of Babel has no information, but a quantum version of the Library of Babel has actually zero information. And
now we're getting close to Vedanta.
I blush to say that my knowledge of Vedanta is Wikipedia level, that I have not probed in any. Well, obviously, Wikipedia has its many, many merits, but my understanding is very, very shallow. So apologies.
Vedanta looks at reality as boxes within boxes. And within each box, there is the state in which there is a period in which we look out and say there is manifestation of things, objects, which appear to be specified in various ways and therefore seem to embody information. But that all of those came from states of avyakta, of non-manifested substrate. And the simple example, in the old texts is pots. Clay is kind of amorphous substance, but it has the potential for producing pots of all types of sizes, shapes, and purposes. So similarly, within every box of reality, and I don't think we've got to anywhere near the box of physics, contains physics, there will be a substrate that is avyakta, which is its primordial state of nothingness. In one sense, no information manifest, nothing specified, but at the same time with the infinite potential complexity. And then that is replicated at a deeper level and a deeper level still. And ultimately, if there is an ultimate source, it will also be like that in one sense, where there is a possibility of absolute zero, but at the same time, the possibility of absolute complexity. And so, does that answer the infinite regression? No, of course not. Come on. If we thought we were going to sort that one out, maybe that was a little overambitious for Arjun's podcast.
How does a zero ontology accommodate the richness of qualia? Once again, the answer is I don't know. But back to non-materialist physicalism again. If the solutions to the equations of quantum field theory encode the value of qualia, if one were notionally to add up all these textures, what would be the upshot? I would say that one would find it actually cancels out to 0, 2. Once again, wild conjecture. But yeah, just to stress, clearly we don't know the answer to why is there something rather than nothing. But if some kind of zero ontology is not the explanation space where we should be looking for answers, I haven't got a clue where we should be looking. Yeah,
I'm not against looking, and I'm not against digging. I think I don't think we've got to the level where we will be able to see everything within the quantum fields that explains exactly how the world and its objectivity manifests. I don't think we're going to find qualia from the quantum fields. I think we will just continue to find the manifestations of physicality, but I don't think that necessarily equates to the qualities and properties of qualia as they exist within my mind. There obviously is some correlation, and that's why I think we will be digging deeper and trying to understand a substrate that can be responsible both for all the properties of physics, but also all the properties, the qualitative properties of experience.
Here is, yes, one, I say, point of difference, as I said, well, let's call it a point of difference, that essentially my working assumption would be that the intrinsic nature of the quantum fields described by physics is experiential. It's not the case that the quantum fields somehow give rise to or associated with experience. Literally, that is what it is like to be a quantum field. I mean, there are one or two qualifications here. I mean, beyond quantum field theory, there's the possibility of string theory or M theory. I don't think it's particularly relevant here. Let's assume that quantum field theory is correct. What is the intrinsic nature of a quantum field? And yeah, if it is experiential, there is no hard problem. There are many mysteries of consciousness and its diversity, and I think the next few billion years may be used exploring the varieties of consciousness with psychedelics, genome reform, and goodness knows what else. First, let's fix the problem of suffering, but after we've phased out the biology of suffering, I think essentially we're going to be exploring the intrinsic subjective properties of matter and energy. But on this story, there is no hard problem. And in one sense, there's as I said, it might sound incredibly arrogant in that I am have been offering answers to the hard problem, the binding problem of causal efficacy, the Palette problem, and yet at the same time, I'm saying I am baffled by reality because, most states of consciousness, most state spaces of consciousness are completely unexplored, unknown. We haven't even names for them or what we lack. All the standard problems of the philosophy of mind are set within a particular conceptual framework, which, as it stands, the materialist paradigm, I think, is flawed.
Could I just ask, what justification can you give for saying that it is, quantum field activity? In one sense, what you're saying, it is consciousness, or gives a direct. Why? Why would I accept that? I mean,
I suppose. Well, here we get into the debate: is physicalism an adequate account of the world? What explains the extraordinary successes of science? After all, this conversation we're having, our computers, our PCs, our mobile phones, this vast technological civilization, is dependent on the understanding of physics. And recall, all the special sciences as standardly conceived, molecular biology reduces to quantum chemistry, which reduces to physics. Essentially, physics works. Whenever we try to test the standard the standard model, it seems to pass with flying colors. And as I said, I completely, as a physicalist, accept this mathematical formalism. I don't think any element of reality is missing. There are one or two complications there, which I don't think are relevant to my point. But yes, a generalization of physics beyond the standard model, as I said, I think best explains the successes of our civilization, which are many and varied. But if one transposes that mathematical formalism onto an experientialist ontology, one has a theory that is explanatorily successful, is consistent with all the empirical evidence, and that we haven't explored this, is actually testable too.
I'm kind of getting the. So please correct me if I've got the wrong impression, but in one sense, and I don't want to take away from all the incredible advances in physics. We're only at the beginning, but it almost is like saying, well, at the moment, quantum field stuff, that's our base, that's our best kind of physics at the moment. Therefore, we're saying consciousness must be a product of that. But if we were at the end of the 19th century, we'd be saying electromagnetic activity, we've got that sorted. That must be the source of consciousness. Or Newton or someone would be saying, all right, we've got Newtonian motion kind of sorted. Is that the source of consciousness? I don't think we can just say that whatever is the latest state we've got, that must be the source of consciousness. There's got to be more to it than that.
I mean, as I said, we are all prisoners of our conceptual scheme, and I alluded earlier to my physics envy and the extent to which, yes, in some sense, I'm still a prisoner, for want of a better word, of scientific materialism, albeit I'm a non-materialist physicist. But the superposition of the principle of quantum mechanics is the only way I know to solve the phenomenal binding or combination problem. Recall that the phenomenal binding or combination problem is, why is it that if you are simply a pack of classical decohered neurons, 86 billion odd neurons, why aren't you just a micro-experiential zombie, just patterns of mind dust? The term mind dust is due to William James. The term micro-experiential zombie is due to philosopher Phil Goff. I mean, after all, your enteric nervous system, the brain in the gut, 500 million odd neurons, a fabulously complicated information processing system, and it is not a subject of experience, a unified subject. Yet somehow, when one is awake, to some extent while dreaming, but not while you are dreamlessly asleep, phenomenal unity occurs, like right now, both local binding, individual perceptual objects, global binding, the unity of perception and the unity of the self. And yes, one wants to explain this within a physicalist context. My working assumption, Schrodinger's neurons, is that, the superposition principle. Sorry, without going into a lot of physics, think of cat states. Before one opens the sealed chamber, the mathematical formalism of quantum physics suggests that what exists is a superposition of a live and dead cat. I think the superposition principle, or I shouldn't say I think, I conjecture the superposition principle explains the properties of our phenomenally bound minds, just as it describes the universe itself. That crudely, you are a bunch of cat states, and cat states are individual states. They're not classical aggregates. This is quantum mind stuff, but quantum mind without the collapse of the wave function. To stress, I'm not proposing any new principle of physics. The reason that most standard physicists would reject this conjecture is the effective lifetime of neuronal superpositions, cat states in the CNS. That the effective imagine what is the lifetime of a state, a superposition of edge detectors, motion detectors, color mediating neurons in your central nervous system. If the lifetime were milliseconds, they would be the obvious candidate for the perfect structural match between what you're experiencing right now and the neurology, ultimately physics. But the effective lifetime in of cat states, neuronal superpositions in the CNS is something like femtoseconds or less. Decoherence, quantum decoherence is incredibly powerful in the warm, wet CNS. So intuitively, this version of quantum mind doesn't work. But one person's reductio ad absurdum is another person's experimentally falsifiable prediction. And I predict that as the technology, interferometry matures, it will be possible to detect a perfect structural match between what you're undergoing right now and the underlying physics as shown by the non-classical interference signature. Sorry, I hadn't meant to go into a long spiel on quantum mind there, but yeah.
No, please don't apologize. Don't apologize. Very good. Yes, though I think what is being determined through all of that physics and the kind of the quote from. I'm hesitant now to say collapse of the quantum states, because we know that it's controversial, but still it seems to be the parlance amongst most physicists. But that you're trying to correlate that with experience, and that may be with the content of our experience, qualia, or it may simply be with the stimulus to the qualia experience. And I'm afraid that I still believe that what is happening from the quantum world upwards is simply that which is helping to manifest the external reality of which my mind is generating my internal experiences. And that the quantum field will only be able to help me understand the nature of that externality as we are modeling it in science and using it in all the applications that we put it to in technology. But that still is not helping to make the jump between the properties of the physics world and the properties of qualia and my mental experiences, never mind the actual properties and qualities of consciousness. And that's why I think it's always important to look at these three categories and see where we're succeeding in shedding light on. And I think we will, the more work we can do, I hope that we can, between our mental states and the physics of this world, I think there is potential for great research. And I do see that as an area that will be enhanced. I'm not sure it does deal with the binding problem, because I'm not sure it's dealing with me as the experiencer. And the unified binding problem has an additional aspect to it, and that is that I sense myself as the perpetual subject of my experience. It's the perpetual experiencer, the same I that seems to exist from day to day, year to year, throughout all I've ever known. And that, I think, raises its own challenge. And I don't think the approach in which we try to diminish that, the integrity of that perpetual experiencer being the kind of persistent subject throughout our life is helpful either.
Philosophers have this terminology between the diachronic and synchronic unity of the self, and actually, though one should be suspicious of philosophical jargon, it's quite useful. I think the diachronic unity of the self, the unity of the self over time, is a myth. Strictly speaking, some kind of empty individualism is true. It's genetically adaptive. That's why it has arisen, but it's not real. By contrast, the unity of the self that you're experiencing right now, I regard as real and having a quantum a quantum basis that is testable. And I think a solution to the measurement problem of quantum mechanics and the binding problem will turn out to be one and the same. The measurement problem, recall from quantum mechanics, is if one takes the formalism seriously, that the one has this continuous, linear, unitary, deterministic evolution of the wave function, and then on the standard view, some kind of Copenhagen interpretation, observation collapses the wave function. And what almost everyone agrees on, from Copenhagenists, Bohmians, Everettianism, is that upon observation one appears to see, it's either a live cat or a dead cat, either a spin up electron or a spin down electron. Either one detects a particle incident at a particular spot on the screen in a double slit experiment, and my working assumption is that it is critical to distinguish between vehicle and content, that when one makes an observation, yes, the content of your observation is collapse. One always sees a live cat, this determinate outcome. But the actual vehicle that mediates this determinate outcome is itself a superposition, succession of superpositions, of neuronal superpositions of edge detectors, motion detectors, color detectors, and so forth, that this individual superposition in your CNS mediates your experience of a determinate outcome, i.e. opening the chamber and seeing a live cat or a particular particle incident on the screen in a double slit experiment. That, two separate questions, vehicle and content. They're not always carefully distinguished. And someone like Schrödinger, who of course came up with this eponymous experiment, Schrödinger's cat, he said he's actually explicitly a direct perceptual direct realist. He says that the question of whether the cat is alive or dead is settled by direct observation. And if one is an inferential realist about perception of world simulation, no, it's not settled by direct observation. One doesn't directly observe anything. It's simply the contents of one's world simulation. And simply because the content is of a determinate outcome doesn't mean to say that the vehicle is no longer in superposition too.
Yeah. Now, in all that explanation of the physics of it and the Schrödinger's cat and all others, there is the natural way we use language, that I am experiencing, I see, I know, etc. So there is this unity of the self. Now, is it diachronic? I suggest that any argument I've ever heard against trying to say that there isn't a continuous me who has experienced my life from when I was a small baby through, my first day at school, which I remember being, and I know what I felt at that time, to now. Any arguments are based on changing the question, not from the question of the experiencer, but to what is we mean by sense of self, and defining sense of self in terms of mental attitudes, what I'm experiencing. If what I'm experiencing now is different to what I experienced a moment ago, am I the same self? No, in some way, my personality, my outlook, my way of experiencing is different, but I remain the same experiencer. So I find that there's a kind of philosophical sleight of hand dealing with this issue of selfhood, but it's not dealing with the issue that I remain the same experiencing self all the way through. So I would argue, and the other arguments that are used against it are based on the presumption of physicalism. If my body changes, if the way my neurons are connected changes, then how can I be the same self? But that's, again, the circular argument of physicalism. And it's making a presumption or making a conclusion based on its original presumption. So I'm not convinced that the challenge of the persistent experiencing self is tackled in any form by the physical process that you have mentioned. I will like to throw in, though, that what you're describing about the nature of how the externality of the properties of physics manifest from the quantum world has also its parallel in some of the corollary Vedanta schools, particularly Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy is kind of the metaphysics that is linked with Vedanta. And it describes this aspect that everything in this world is almost pulsating into reality on a fractional moment-to-moment basis. That out of non-manifested is becoming manifested, unmanifested is becoming manifested again and again. And there is an interaction with all consciousness, not just human beings, because Vedanta has the picture that actually wherever we see life, life is the combination of consciousness and a biological body. And it is that vehicle, and that in every then form of life, there is interaction with the physics of this world through the experience, and that there is in some way a feedback loop between consciousness and the physicality of the next moment. And that, I think, could be developed and might actually, there may be parallels. I'm not saying they're going to be exactly the same. I'm not saying you have to adopt this, but I think that there are some interesting parallels by which we could be exploring much more the relationship of consciousness and the physics of this world. And I think they will also illuminate some of the issues on the so-called measurement problem.
A lot of points you raised there. I just want to focus on one. We need to be careful that we're not using the term identity in two separate senses. There is one sense from logic in which A equals B. Anything true of A is also true of B, and this is sort of trivially true. And yet there are things that are true of your namesake of 5 minutes ago and you now. As I said, there are things, different statements are true or false. And therefore, two senses of personal identity that shouldn't be blurred. And as far as I can tell, and here I know we disagree, or at least tentatively disagree. I think it would be possible, to create your molecular duplicate in a vat, created with all your memories, experiences, sense of enduring self, and it could be sustained for anything from microseconds to however long you like. And that, it's a succession of here and nows strung together in particular ways that consists of the diachronic seeming unity of the self, the unity of the self over time. That, a conceptual scheme depends on enduring metaphysical egos. Without a conception of enduring metaphysical egos, society, economics, finance, personal relationships would collapse. But ultimately, it's not consistent with physicalism. And you might say, so much the worse for physicalism, and that I suppose I'm a physicalist. You're not a physicalist, but we're both consciousness fundamentalists.
Other kind of element, that you mentioned at the beginning, something that I think we can all cheer on. The aspiration for helping people achieve super happiness. Wonderful. But if I'm not the same person who's going to be experiencing that happiness, then what the heck? Why? Why would I be worried about it? So if it's not going to be me experiencing it, then why should I kind of make that endeavor for extra happiness? And I think this is the difference, that in our preoccupation with the focus on science, particularly, and all the STEM subjects in recent kind of decades, centuries, and so on, we perhaps are losing the ability. We haven't given enough attention to an actual analysis of introspection through processes such as meditation, contemplation, and self-study. And that's why I think that we need, I wouldn't want to detract anyone from their scientific research, but at the same time, I think that in philosophy, we also need to be aware that it is important to delve deeply into the subject we're discussing, such as consciousness and mind, and to really understand these intimately, through kind of rigorous processes of contemplation, so that we can really, bring these different worlds together, and we can maybe, help individuals understand themselves and what happiness actually means, because that's a big topic in itself.
I think, yes, important points of agreement. We're both, in some sense, consciousness fundamentalists. I'm a physicalist, you're not a physicalist, if I understand correctly. I very much agree with you about the way that modern science has downplayed the significance of introspection, meditational states. I think the vast majority of states of consciousness have never been recruited by natural selection for any information sensing purpose, any information signaling purpose. And that's why psychedelia is so baffling, that someone takes a psychedelic drug, is transported into this alien realm, alien state spaces of consciousness, no conceptual scheme to navigate or cope, baffling. Rather anticlimactically, I'm going to have to stop soon. I've got a tickle in my throat that I'm trying to ease with a throat pastel. I would love to end with some inspiring quote about the nature of consciousness and reality. I'm afraid, rather anticlimactically, it's going to have to end on some meditation on the ills of the flesh. Long live transhumanist civilization, in which we get rid of the frailties of Darwinian bodies and enjoy lifelong gradients of superhuman bliss and eternal youth, and all the other things that transhumanists aspire to. But that's going to have to be the topic for another podcast. Apologies, I don't in any way wish to curtail the discussion, but I think my throat is probably going to give out soon.
No, I think we both come to a very good point, perhaps to help to bring this to a conclusion. I say that kind of the aspiration for eternal kind of happiness and enjoyment, and is also part of the aspiration of Vedanta. It's suggesting that that's going to be found in terms of consciousness itself. and that consciousness can be freed from the biological constraints of its embodiment, and enjoy the actual relationships and activities of a state of pure consciousness. What that is, what that could be, that's maybe another time. But David, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I've learned a lot, and I deeply appreciate the way you're approaching these topics, and I kind of wish you all the best in all research.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Yes, perhaps in a future podcast, we could be discussing getting rid of suffering, a world of super happiness. I would say genome reform and reprogramming the global ecosystem. I would guess that Vedanta would differ here. But yes, thank you to you both for a fascinating discussion. Perhaps it might be possible to leave a URL so that any interested members of the audience could dig deeper into our respective perspectives if they were, if they're interested.
Yeah, we'll have links in the description for whatever our guests want to have posted there. Yeah, but I've been meaning to say it's actually getting quite late here. I need to go too, but the discussion was going so passionately, I just kept letting it go. But thanks for that. It was a great discussion, and yeah, perhaps we can do one in the future. It's great when there's two guests who've thought about a subject deeply, but are actually open-minded and able to discuss it. You know, the usual thing you see in social media where people, maybe the last thing that they do is not think about it so deeply, and they just get in their camp and then they talk to people from another camp. There's fireworks rather than an actual exchange of ideas. So this was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All the best.